here is a quick talk that I put together on the train with incredibly spotty data. So some random screenshots of web pages that I already had loaded rather than high quality images. So forgive me for this, but I thought it'd be interesting to give you all a little bit of an update of what the GraphQL Working Groups have been working on roughly over the last 3 months. Some of these things that I'm going to talk about are things that we've been working on for literally years, but we are still been working on them for the last 3 months. So let's have a look into some of these. So this is a screenshot I took today of the GraphQL spec, and it's great. Here we were open sourced in July 2015, exciting. And we had a good few releases, and then October 2021. And I looked at the calendar the other day and I went, should we do another one of those? Because the working draft, this is what most people who implement GraphQL actually implement. Like Michael writes Hot Chocolate, the .NET implementation of GraphQL, and he works off the working draft. And to be fair, with Michael, he doesn't even work off the working draft. He works off what the people are discussing in the working group. He wants to see if it's going to work ahead of time. So this is mostly what people actually implement, but we should still have spec cuts from time to time. And most of the stuff in that is, at the moment, is chores. It's tidying up algorithms, it's fixing bugs, fixing mistakes, adding clarity. There are some really nice things in there. So all of a sudden, one of has been merged. That's my spec. I did that one, which is great. So now we have input polymorphism, which is great. And now means that you can have like a finder field for, let's say, a user, where you can say, I want to find this user by their ID or by their passport number or by their email address or by their username or by whatever. And you just need one field to do it all of a sudden, rather than having like 5 different access fields, which is what we used to do. So that's really nice. There are a number of other nice features in there, but we're freezing the spec today. Hooray! So essentially, anything that got given the RFC 3 status, which is like the final status, this is going to go into the spec, before today, should go out in the next release, and that release, we are hoping, will be ready in time for GraphQL Conf in September. So we're going to have a cut by September. Hooray! Let's talk about some of the things that are coming after that, though. Some of the things that we're working on continually. One you may know of is called Incremental Delivery, but you'll probably know it better by the stream and defer directives. And these have been discussed
in 2015.
Literally along with the launch, pretty much, wasn't it? Yeah.
This is what we are doing next in GraphQL.
Yes. Here's the next thing. It's 10 years later. Honestly, it's pretty close. It's pretty close. We have essentially, we had a pretty good version of it a couple years ago, but then we found some issues in it that caused like a combinatorics explosion problem, and we didn't want to just ship that over to people and say, this is your problem now. So we came up with a more efficient solution and a more efficient network structure, payload structure, which we have specified, and that is making its way through the spec review process. But because it is such a huge change to the way that GraphQL works, it is taking a fair while. So we're breaking it up into chunks, and we're moving the little chunks over a bit at a time. So we are making progress on that, but progress will still be quite slow. But it is still exciting. Schema coordinates, something much, much simpler. When we look at stuff in our schema, we quite commonly refer to it by things like this, like business.name, right? We all sort of do this, or when we're talking about, like, let's say the name argument here, it's like, here's the name argument on the query.businessMatch field. These are schema coordinates. These are ways of pointing to something in your schema and saying, I want to talk about this thing specifically. We've had these for years, but we haven't specified them, which means there's not like a shared guaranteed way of talking about them. For example, do we keep the colon after the name or do we not? For example, there are lots, or do we just use a dot between business match and name? There's lots of different ways that we could do it. We are now specifying how you can identify things. And this is going to be really useful for things like tooling, for things like analytics. If you want to know what stuff has been used in your query, if you want to know what the hit count is for how often do people actually query the business name field, it makes it really easy to tally these things and to uniquely identify them. Also really, really useful for documentation. You can now say, hey, this thing's deprecated, use this thing instead. And you don't have to say, please see the name field on the user type. You can just say, please see user.name. It's useful. So that's good. That's going through. Fragment arguments. Our own Yovi, he is currently the champion of this. It was previously championed by Matt Mahoney of Facebook. And essentially, this is the ability to add variable definitions, essentially, to your fragments themselves, which then means that when it comes time to use a fragment, you can pass these variables. This turns out to be really, really useful when you are building like a composable system and when you're using fragments in the way that they should be used, which is locally to the component, because now the component can choose what variables to feed into that. It's really valuable. Nullability is like the biggest, one of the longest discussions, one of the most, I guess, controversial. One of the things that we've swung back and forth on all the different ways of doing it for over the years.
And it's not in the spec cut.
It's not in this spec cut. We're still working on it, but we're close. We really hoped we were going to pip it over the line just before, but we didn't quite do it. We have basically landed on a solution to the nullability problem. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the nullability problem, let's say you've got a mobile app like this, and you've got an issue with your payments microservice, right? And so now you've said this is payment methods, it's an array, but the array doesn't have a bang after it, so it's nullable, and that means it's okay, this thing can error. So when we go and render this, we get this one widget here, maybe that's failed because we can't load that, but everything else is fine. Now, if we were to put the bang on the end of it here, what would actually happen is that error that our microservice paid for a small part of our application would now bubble up to the next layer, and it might result in a full page error. Nope, you can't see anything, sorry. Payments are down right now, so you can't see anything. And this really goes against like the ethos of GraphQL, which is to have partial success. And so what we normally do, us GraphQL practitioners, is we normally make things that might error nullable, because we don't want those errors to bubble up further. We want to be able to handle it nicely. So we make things that can error nullable. What sort of things can error? Everything. Literally everything can error. So we make everything nullable, and then there's no bangs anywhere. We keep a few bangs just because like sometimes things don't make sense. If this were to error, the entire rest of this object doesn't make sense. If I don't have the user's ID, then I can't render their URL to link to them, so I can't do anything with it. So we do have a few things where we use non-nulls, but generally we've always told you that the preference is to make things nullable. And this is because when we have errors happening, we propagate those errors in order to maintain this not null guarantee. So what we're introducing is a mode where you can say what you want your error behavior to be. And by default, be propagate, which is the historical thing. But you could change it to no propagate. Then we can have our bang here, and we can have our local error. We will still make that field null when the error happens. But this is the important thing. The bang is now saying not that this will never be null. It's saying this will never be null unless an error happened. It's semantically non-null. We never intend there to be a null here, but it might be there if there's an error. So what we're basically saying with this is for clients like Relay, Apollo, Urkel, anyone else who can intelligently look at this data that's been sent over the wire and can look at that data in combination with the errors, it can make sure that you, as the application developer, never accidentally read that null. If you try and read that null, maybe an error will be thrown, maybe the error boundary in your React application will handle it for you, or a try-catch, or whatever you've got going on. So this is really cool, and it basically solves this problem that we've had forever, and it means that suddenly errors don't break relays normalized caching. It doesn't like break all these other things. It means that we get localized errors everywhere. And it's opt-in, so if you don't want it, you don't have to have it.
And
Great.
Does everyone know what null propagation is in GraphQL?
If you know what null propagation is in GraphQL, put your hand up.
It's very interesting. Most people don't know that it even exists. That's when I talk to people. What the hell is null propagation? And it's basically if a field is null, that is not supposed to be null because of an error or because of data error, it basically deletes the parent. And it will delete the parents of your result object until there's nothing left or it hits a nullable field. And the unexpected thing, if you compare it to REST, is that suddenly, because of one error in your result, the whole result is gone. That is the effect, and that is what most people don't expect when they use GraphQL.
Yeah, and we represent that with a bang. We say, hey, don't ever let this be null. I don't care whether it errors or what. It can never, ever, ever be null in the response payload that the user pulls down. And so to keep that promise, we have to do what Michael says. We go up a level when we make that thing null as well. But what if that's not null? We go up another level. And in Facebook, they even call it kills parent on exception to make it really explicit that that bang there is actually really scary and it's going to cause you a lot of problems. So don't add it. We want you to add it. We want things to be, when something is non-null, when you're never expecting this thing to be null in your schema, we want you to be able to read it and to be able to indicate that to the client. Otherwise, if you're truly making your fields all nullable and then you're handling it on the client side, your client code is going to be full of like, if the user has a username and it's not null, then render this, otherwise render an anonymous, deleted? Wait, which dash? Like, you don't know what to render, you don't know what that null means, because semantically, a user's username would never be null, maybe, in your scenario. So this allows you to indicate the semantic nullability of something, and then you only have to handle errors. And errors come with their own meaning. They come with their own message. So that was a big discussion. Operation descriptions. This is quite a small one, quite a small, interesting one that's just recently been raised and has been bumped straight to RFC2, like we are pushing this straight through, pretty much. So GraphQL, you probably already know your schema has descriptions on types. It has descriptions on fields, on arguments. Like everything in the schema has a description that helps you to use it, that built-in documentation that you can see through GraphiQL. But what about the queries that you write? When you write a query, like the ones that we saw on the slides earlier when we were talking about fragment arguments, those don't have descriptions, like a description here above a query or above a variable or above a fragment like this. We haven't had this in the past. Now, doesn't immediately seem that useful until you think, actually, if I'm building some demo apps, like this is a great way of explaining what's going on. But if I've got a large language model that I need to understand this thing, I can put large language model instructions in here. I can teach the system to understand itself. I can add these kind of introspection capabilities to the operations that I have in my own application. And this can be really powerful. I think Stephen Spalding's the one who's talking about this quite a lot at the moment. I think he's the champion.
He's also doing is it a panel now or a talk?
Yes, he's doing a panel.
A panel at GraphQL
on the topic of AI and LLMs. So yeah, we're looking forward to that one. But traditionally in GraphQL, we've used the introspection system to describe what your schema is capable of. So can it do this thing? Has it got support for that thing? But what about some of these things that we've seen so far that are purely syntactical things? So fragment arguments, for example, or operation descriptions like we just saw. How do you know whether the server supports that or not? That's not a feature of your schema. It's not a part of your data model. It's like a syntax in the document. And either when you send that document to the server, it will understand it and process it as it should, Or it will go, I don't know what this is, you shouldn't have quote marks here. And it will just throw a parse error, like I can't parse this, I don't understand it. So we need a way of indicating what features like that that aren't part of the description of your data model can be in your service, that your GraphQL service supports, not your schema itself. And those are service capabilities. And this is incredibly up in the air because it was only like presented about a month ago. But the idea is that in addition to all of your schema capabilities that describe all your types, we might give you the ability to indicate what things your service is capable of. And we've reserved like the org.graphql scope for anything that's spec related, so fragment arguments or on-error operation descriptions, that kind of stuff. Also an RFC scope for anything that's experimental, so client-controlled nullability, which we're not going to have anymore probably because we've replaced it with the on-error that you saw before, or experimental versions of incremental delivery. Or maybe that you've got WebSockets, and here's the endpoint that you would use for WebSockets. But one of the really interesting things about this is we also allow you to add your own. So you can add, for example, whether you're in a production, staging, or development environment, what your release hash was, or any other small pieces of data that would be useful for your client tooling to pull down. Maybe it could be things like where to send your trusted documents, because we must always mention trusted documents. We also have the GraphQL-over-HTTP specification. Who here uses GraphQL-over-HTTP? The rest of you, what are you using GraphQL over? No, seriously, GraphQL is primarily used over HTTP. And we do not have a released official specification for doing so, and we're 10 years into the journey of GraphQL. GraphQL itself doesn't care about your transport. It doesn't care whether it's HTTP, WebSockets, whether it's a function call, does not care about it at all. So we have a specification now for GraphQL over HTTP. It is still RFC 2, so it's not quite released yet, but we are getting there. And one of the interesting things that it introduces is this new media type. Now, you may all know the problem of the 200 OK problem of GraphQL, which is essentially GraphQL just responds 200 OK to everything. It doesn't matter if it failed completely, if it failed partially, if it succeeded. It's all just 200s. That doesn't need to be the case, and many servers already support this. The idea is by using a specific media type, we can now use those other status codes without causing client confusion. Without this, it's quite reasonable for a proxy like Nginx, for example, if it has an error, to respond, 500 or 502, is it gateway? 502, here's a JSON payload that describes the problem. But there's no guarantee that that JSON payload actually matches the GraphQL specification. So we couldn't safely do that. But with this, if you say this is your media type for your response, you are saying this is GraphQL compliant. So now you can use whatever status code makes sense. So we are in the process of specifying those status codes, including an experimental one for partial success, 294, which does not exist. So if you know of any issues, any server or proxy or cache or IDS or anything that will break if we send an HTTP 294 through it, please let me know. Partial success status code 294. We also have the Composite Schemas Working Group, which is working on essentially the next generation of federation. We've heard a lot about federation this evening. Do you want to say something for a moment about it?
Yeah, so we hope we will have a draft out by GraphQL. We're working with a ton of companies in the industry, like Apollo is working on it, together with ChilliCream, together with the Guild. GraphBase has joined the working group meeting, so there's a lot of industry knowledge building this new version. And we basically started building this specification with a blank sheet. So we thought about if we could do GraphQL federation without the limitation that we have at the moment in GraphQL, how would we do that? And we heard about testing today. With the new lookups that we introduced in the composite schema specification, it becomes much more testable because the contract is much more defined there's not an entities field, but rather there are concrete lookup fields that can be used and that are basically the entry points in each subgraph. So there's a ton of new stuff coming in this federation space or distributed GraphQL space, and you will hear more about it at GraphQL.
Really excited for that. It's been a years-long project, and Michael is I guess the champion of that, the main. Yeah. Have you given yourself a title?
No.
It is very much a team effort. There is fantastic. These folks, Apollo, the Guild, ChilliCream, and a number of others, GraphBase, meet weekly. Every week they have an hour-long meeting where they come together and make sure that everything's still progressing in the right direction and keep advancing it. It's really, really compelling work. Excellent work. Thank you. We have GraphQL.js, which any of you in the JavaScript ecosystem are probably using. Also used on clients as well, of course. That is in the run-up to its v17 release. So we're making some decisions there. One decision in particular that's being discussed at the moment is whether or not to go ES modules only or keep compatibility with CommonJS. Now, one of the interesting things is now that Node and all stable releases of Node now require of ES modules, the tables have turned a little bit, and actually maybe we can go ES modules only. So there's some interesting discussion there. If you have really solid reasons not to do that, now would be a good time to raise them. We have v5 of GraphiQL just around the corner, or technically it's released, but I think it has a few little issues that need to be worked out. But this is really exciting. This is something that we've wanted for years and years and years. And essentially, it moves us from using CodeMirror as the editor to Monaco. Now, Monaco is the editor that VS Code uses. So if you're familiar with VS Code, if you use VS Code every day, suddenly GraphiQL is going to be that much nicer for you to use. You can't really tell, maybe, but you've got some neat features like the color-matched curly braces is one of the more obvious things. We also now support like writing comments within the variables, which can be useful. But the main thing is if you press F1, you get like the whole command picker and you can find all the stuff you can do, like multiple cursors, changing case, and just mostly all the shortcuts that you're used to are now the shortcuts that should work in GraphiQL as well. So that's really exciting. Vim mode is possible, yes. We also have now a new working group focused on OpenTelemetry. So there was some experimental OpenTelemetry support for GraphQL previously, but we are now working with OpenTelemetry themselves and with a number of other vendors to make sure that the spans and, yeah, I forget the terminology, for OpenTelemetry are correct for GraphQL, and we're guiding people to do the right things. One of the problems historically has been, for example, that we've said, oh, yeah, you could have a span for resolvers. And that just means that you're creating like 1 million spans because sometimes we call so many resolvers and they're so tiny. This is helping to guide what you should do on that front. We've also had massive overhauls of the GraphQL.org documentation, the Learn profiles, and also the GraphQL.js documentation. Loads more guides there. I think we do actually talk about testing mutations on there as well. So that is good. And we have a new working group, the Community Working Group. So this is actually a non-technical working group that talks about what should we as the GraphQL community be focused on, how can we keep GraphQL advancing, how can we keep getting more people involved, more meetups like this organized. One of the key things that they've done recently is they're working on a redesign of the website, and you might have seen it already in the GraphQL conf pages, which were updated, I guess, about a month and a half ago, something like that. So quite a much more modern design than what we had previously. So that is particularly exciting. And yeah, this is a call for you all to consider getting involved. One of the things that I really love about GraphQL is it has an incredibly open collaboration model. Like, all you need to do is sign a contributor licensing agreement that basically says, yeah, I agreed to submit all my stuff under the MIT license to the GraphQL Foundation for guardianship. And then you can basically start turning up to meetings. You can start making contributions to any of our open source repositories. It's really easy. Like, that's what I do. So by all means, please get involved if anything, if any of those topics, and there was a lot of them, I know, piqued your interest, please do get involved. We'd love to hear from you. Okay. That's me done talking about that. So a little bit of closing remarks, I guess.